One of my favorite examples of why you can trust the biblical Gospels historically is what have traditionally been called undesigned coincidences. Now, undesigned coincidences are instances when you have one or more independent historical accounts and they interlock in such a way that would be unexpected if the story were simply fabricated wholesale. For example, in John's biography of Jesus' life, we have a story of the feeding of the 5,000. And in that account, Jesus turns to the disciple Philip to ask where they should buy bread. Now, Philip is a relatively minor player in the whole Jesus story, so why exactly does Jesus turn to Philip, and why would John even bother mentioning that specific detail? Well, earlier in the Gospel account, John mentions briefly that Philip is a resident of the region of Bethsaida. Now, if we skip over to Luke's biography, he tells us in the 9th chapter that the geographical location of the feeding of the 5,000 story takes place in Bethsaida. Luke does mention that Jesus turns and asks the disciples, but doesn't mention Philip specifically. Luke gives us pretext and the reason as to why Jesus would ask Philip, and John gives us the specific detail that it is in fact Philip who he asks, which makes perfect sense of Jesus' actions. If Philip was a local, then it would have been logical for Jesus to ask him specifically. These two stories interlock independently, creating a woven together fabric and a thread of trustworthy accuracy. Similarly, in Mark and Matthew's biography of Jesus' life, Mark in the 15th chapter and Matthew in the 26th chapter, we have the story of Jesus' trial before the Jewish priestly council. The narrative has witnesses who step forward and give false testimony. They declare that, quote, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another, not made with hands,' unquote." Now take note here, nowhere in either Matthew or Mark's biographies do we have Jesus as recorded saying these words, but we see this interlocking thread filled out by John's account. In John's biography, Chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, a hostile group come to Jesus and ask, quote, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do this?" To which Jesus responds, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it up again in 3 days," unquote. Now, Jesus in that narrative is referring to his own physical resurrection. But John's biography fills out the background we see given as a later misrepresentation described by Matthew and Mark. John gives us the backdrop to the accusation, but not the accusation itself. Matthew and Mark give us the accusation, but not the backdrop. They interlock. And these aren't the only two. The Gospels, along with many of the other 27 independently written documents that we now refer to as the New Testament, they're filled with these types of connective details. Threads that weave together the connective fabric of accuracy and internal reliability. Now, if you're interested in learning more about undesigned coincidences, I'd highly recommend getting Lydia McGrew's book titled Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidences in the Gospel and Acts. And I would also recommend checking out the webinar and the talk on this topic led by my friend Jonathan McClatchy, of which I'll link below.